Sir John Ross, the miller's son from rural Caithness, who became one of Otago's most successful businessmen, as well as one of southern New Zealand's most generous philanthropists. John Ross was born at Gerston near Holkirk in northern Caithness in 1834. But his family was really from Kildonan in Sutherlandshire, tenants of the Duke of Sutherland who were cleared from their land along with hundreds of others in 1814. His grandfather had been a flour miller here at Helmsdale, but after the family was forced off the Sutherland estate, they moved north to Caithness, where John's father, also called John, became a tenant flour miller at Gerston. He married Janet Sutherland, daughter of a farmer from nearby Rangag in Latheran Parish, with whom he had 7 children. John was their eldest son and spent much of his early childhood years out in the country on his grandparents' farm. He began his education there in a one-room schoolhouse where every pupil had to bring along a lump of peat every day to keep the school fire burning. But then he attended a free church school here in Halkirk, where he received a solid education that included Latin and Greek. Leaving school at 14, John was apprenticed to a draper here in Libster, a fishing village about 30 kilometres from Halkirk. But the business was struggling and he had plenty of time to indulge his passion for reading, look after his employer's garden and mend fishing nets, and he also began to think about immigration, considering an offer to work in Canada. Instead, he moved to a much busier drapery at Thurso, Caithness' largest town. After about a year there, he was headhunted by the Begg brothers, who operated a general store here in Golspie that serviced scattered communities across Sutherlandshire. Soon afterwards, his employer, Robert Begg, decided to immigrate to Otago, leaving 19-year-old John Ross to run his store here at Golspie. This link would be crucial to John Ross's future. Begg opened a general business in Dunedin, but remained in partnership with another brother, William, back in Golspie. William Begg eventually became concerned about his brother's operation in the colony and asked John Ross to go to Dunedin and straighten things out. John Ross was well equipped for his mission. After his initial spell here in Golspie, he'd spent time working for large firms in both Edinburgh and Glasgow, before the Begg brothers had invited him back to Golspie to assist in the management of their business. This saw him travelling throughout Sutherlandshire, making regular buying trips to both Glasgow and London and mastering the business skills that he would deploy to such good effect in Otago. He sailed for Otago in March 1861 as a formal partner of the Beggs, travelling in cabin class on the Velour from London. He brought with him £3,000 worth of trade goods to sell and was entitled to a full share of the profits. The voyage out proved exceptionally slow, and the drunken captain missed the entrance to Otago Harbour entirely and reached the Waitaki before realising and turning round. By the time the ship actually reached Otago Harbour in August, it had been given up for lost. But by that time, gold had been discovered in central Otago, and the demand for trade goods suddenly soared. John Ross's timing simply couldn't have been better. John Ross thought Otago Harbour was the most beautiful sight he'd ever seen as he steamed from Port Chalmers up to Dunedin in 1861. The settlement itself was another story, still just a ramshackle cluster of primitive buildings amidst muddy, half-formed streets. But all that was about to change. Gold and the prosperity it brought transformed Dunedin and opened the way for young entrepreneurs like John Ross to make their fortunes along with it. Hard work was required nonetheless. Ross served behind the counter here at the store at the corner of Manse and Princes Street by day, did the accounts in the evening and slept in the shop overnight. He later recalled his very first New Year's Day in New Zealand.
I cannot say that I enjoyed it very much. Although the middle of summer, the rain poured down in torrents and the mud on the streets was about half a foot deep.
As it turned out, 1862 was to be a watershed year for John Ross in other ways too. He bought out Robert Begg to take over the drapery business, then went into partnership with another newly arrived Caithness draper, Robert Glendinning. They segued early on from retail to importing and wholesaling drapery. Then in 1879, they established the Roslyn Woolen Mills to manufacture textiles and expanded into large-scale sheep farming in central Otago, as well as coal mining. Together, the two men would build Ross and Glendinning into one of Dunedin's most successful companies of the next century or more, and amass considerable personal fortunes. They would also marry sisters, Margaret and Mary Castles, respectively, tying their business fortunes together and handing on the enterprise to the next generation of an extended family network. John Ross moved to London in 1870 to open a buying office for the firm. He would spend the next 32 years in the imperial capital while maintaining a leading role in Dunedin business affairs from afar. Later, he lived in the fashionable London suburb of Highgate. Not bad for the son of a Highlander who'd suffered eviction from Dunedin and had had to start life from a very modest base in rural Caithness. Then in 1905, John and Margaret Ross came back to Dunedin, where he spent the rest of his life. As well as overseeing the largest manufacturing concern in New Zealand, plus his other diverse business interests, he was to play a large role in the life of the city as a philanthropist and civic leader. John Ross was knighted in 1922 and died in 1927, aged 92. He left an estate valued at £280,000, an enormous sum at that time, and making him one of the wealthiest of Otago's pioneer settlers. He had already been a generous benefactor to Dunedin's Presbyterian institutions, particularly Knox Church and Knox College, during his lifetime, and further generous bequests were made to these and many other Dunedin bodies after his death. But there are two institutions that he funded which still bear his name to the present. The first is here in Dunedin, the Presbyterian Elderly Care Facility in North East Valley, which is called Ross Home. And from the other end of John Ross's life, this is the Ross Institute in Halkirk. It was erected by Ross in 1912 as a memorial to his parents and for the benefit of the inhabitants of the parish of Halkirk. It was a generous gesture by this very successful Otago colonist and a gift that continues to give over a century later.